is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
Good morning and welcome to the program. After some weeks of debate, internal division as well, laws to block the return of terrorist dual citizens will be introduced to Parliament later today. It's been given the green light by the Cabinet, the Coalition Party Room. Labor indicating it's likely to back the changes. It wants to see the detail. It could be made retrospective as well, this stripping of citizenship, basically for those who are already serving time for terrorism offences, that they, once they leave prison, could be deported. This is not yet law or proposed law. This is going to be considered by the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security. The Prime Minister's been out this morning on breakfast television making the case for the change. Here he was on the Nine Network's Today Show.
Said in February this year as part of a national security statement that we were going to do this, and about 4 months later that's exactly what we've done. It was important to thoroughly consult over this. It's been several times to the National Security Committee of the Cabinet, it's been to the Cabinet twice, and it's been strongly supported by the Party Room.
Initially, the Prime Minister had suggested the Minister would intervene and make the decision. Now it's going to be an automatic revoking under Section 35 of the Citizenship Act. I spoke to the Minister and I asked him this morning, isn't that backtracking from the government's original proposal?
This is a strengthening of the position that we had first put, because this is a self-executing act, if you like. So if people have conducted themselves in such a way, engaged in terrorist acts or financing or training, for example, by their very conduct, there is an automatic renunciation of their citizenship. That's the default position.
The government believes it will stack up constitutionally. The Communications Minister said it's got a high probability of surviving any challenge. Probability, no guarantee though, and that was the message as well this morning from Mr Dutton.
There's always constitutional risk in anything that we do, but we've accepted the legal advice. We've taken on board the advice of some very wise and learned counsel, and I think the bill that we've constructed mitigates the risk as good as any government could.
With me on the program this morning, Assistant Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer Ed Hughesy. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. Ed, is this something Labor's going to back?
We've said from the get-go we're prepared to work with the government on this because the general public expects that on national security, something as important as that, it should be above the politics, and we should get the parties working together. So we also were quite open to this notion of amending the Citizenship Act to go from having a situation where people who stood outside the law by virtue of the fact that they were fighting for foreign armies that were against Australia, and changing that to cover in terms of listed terrorist organisations. We'd been open to that for quite some time. What has been extremely frustrating is the fact that we have sought for quite some time to see the detail. We've sought to get a briefing, which we're now told we'll get after the legislation is made public. And I just think that's wrong. I think if you're fair income about this in terms of involving both parties, you'd play it differently. You would involve the opposition. We've all got a stake in national security and making sure that Australians are safe. And I just think that there are elements of this that could have been done differently. I mean, we've got to a point where now they've finally agreed that the Minister can't have the sole discretion on making the final call on these things. Because a lot of people had a concern that if you're going to have laws to make people safe, they've got to be effective.
So do you think that this is lessening the law, so to speak, or a backtracking of the law from what the government had proposed, that they've softened it?
I think it's backtracking from a considerable risk that the laws would have been left vulnerable to being struck down because they weren't constitutional. And so if the government has taken on the legal advice and amended the position accordingly, then well and good. Again, it's about laws that are effective in keeping people safe and secure, and that's definitely what we want to support.
Josh Frydenberg, I guess there should be some credit here go to Julie Bishop, Malcolm Turnbull, Mr Pyne, for raising those concerns in the first place. They should get some credit here for making the law more robust than the initial proposal, which would have been struck down for sure.
Oh, there's no doubt this has been a team effort, and the Prime Minister has delivered on his commitment to make changes to extend Section 35 of the Citizenship Act to dual nationals who are engaged in terrorist activities. And it's important that we do have bipartisanship in this area, like we've had up to this point, because at the end of the day we have to keep Australians safe. And the problem with the terrorists who go over to fight in Iraq and Syria is that the experience from Afghanistan is that they do come back here and they do try to recommit offences.
You say it's important we have bipartisanship,
Sure.
but last week, after Mr Dreyfus on this program said a line that you bring them home to convict them, stating that legal principle, the Prime Minister said Labor's rolling out the red carpet to terrorists.
But we actually disagree with Mark Dreyfus strongly on this matter. You see, the experience from Afghanistan is that 30 Australians went to fight over there. Of those 30 who went to fight, 25 came back here, and of those 25 who came back here, 19 re-engaged in terrorist-type activities. Now, 8 of those were convicted, and now 5 are still in jail. The experience of that is with 120 Australians who are currently over there in Syria and Iraq, around half of whom are dual nationals. We don't want them back here potentially recommitting. Now, there's real difficulties, obviously, with the gathering of the evidence and the like.
You say you want bipartisanship, but given Andrew Probyn's story last week about the question time brief and then the reaction to the Dreyfus interview on AM Agenda, this doesn't look like a government that wants bipartisanship. You want to split and wedge Labor.
We want, first and foremost, the best possible laws to keep Australia safe, and we believe that Labor will come to the table like they have in the past, like they will now.
Do you regret that Mark Dreyfus made those comments in the first place, given the government's not even... the government's come up with an idea, a proposal, which would not require anyone to be brought back, that this happens automatically. It's been in place, this law, since the end of the Second World War.
I think the reaction to Mark Dreyfus was offensive, to suggest that when you look at what he actually said and the way it was characterised, and the treatment of Mark Dreyfus was just, like I said, just offensive. I think it was wrong and overreach simply to score political points on the day, and it does undermine the claim. There's no doubt from this bloke, in terms of bipartisanship, I don't have any issue with that, but the people that are making the calls on this matter, the way that they've conducted themselves, it's hard to believe that they do want to be bipartisan. And frankly, we cannot afford to be partisan on the issue. This is a serious matter involving the safety and security of Australians. We all have a role to play in making people feel safe and secure. It is not a plaything, a political plaything of the day. And let's just get on with the job and give people the feeling that they don't have to fear that the laws aren't up to date and aren't changing with an evolving terrorist threat.
Well, we've had good bipartisanship on issues like the data retention in terms of extending the powers for law enforcement agencies, etc. Look, national security is a vitally important area which does require bipartisanship, and we will seek it out wherever we can.
Let's look at the constitutionality of the law. Malcolm Turnbull says there's a high probability it will stack up. It will be challenged, you'd think, by someone. What's your take on all of that?
Well, Peter Dutton has said publicly that we've received legal advice and this is consistent with that, so we're very confident and comfortable where we're at.
Ed Husic, I guess it's hard for you to comment too much given you haven't seen the detail.
Which is exactly the point. And we've previously been able to get these type of briefings in advance on this or any other incidents that occur. I think it's important for oppositions to be briefed so that the public debate is better informed, but that hasn't happened with this, and I would hope that this is a one-off and that this isn't a sign of a new approach to dealing with these type of issues. And frankly, I don't understand why. The question has to be asked, why is the government refusing to hand over to the opposition? In terms of run-of-the-mill legislation, we get it a few days in advance to mull over it and be able to then respond and raise issues. And sometimes what people don't necessarily see is that the parties do work together to try and iron out problems. The government sees the wisdom in that. The opposition sees the benefit of getting the sort of thinking behind legislation. We've had none of that.
But this does look like a cabinet that's working in the sense that it's contested. That Mr Turnbull and others, Julie Bishop, make their case. They've succeeded in that case, from my reading on it, they've got exactly what they had wanted, and they have put these guarantees in place essentially by using an old law. Unlike the former Labor government, for example, this is a cabinet that works. The Prime Minister listens, does the job and gets the law in.
I'm going to have to say, beg to differ. I mean, that's post-fact statement in the sense that, you know, the way, when you look at some of these laws and the way that they were being introduced, or the proposed laws were being introduced, and the way it was taken to Cabinet, and the way that no one on Cabinet was briefed in advance, that they didn't have copies before
But they kicked up a stink and they got it changed.
No, but they kicked up a stink. Why did they kick up a stink? On two grounds. One, the proper process wasn't followed from a government that said in opposition it would establish Cabinet government properly.
In the end it was, wasn't it?
And
in the end it was.
And two,
because
the
those
laws
ministers kicked
that
up
were
a
being
stink, it
proposed.
was.
No, well, look, you're giving credit to them because, you know, they spilt the meal and they cleaned up after themselves. You're not looking at the fact that the accident occurred in the first place. I mean, the reality is they promised that they would be a proper Cabinet government, and in this case they were proposing widespread changes to the Citizenship Act that a number of people went, hang on a second, this may actually breach the Constitution, international law, and they had to clean it up.
Look, I think this has been a significant reform and commitment from the government.
But did the Prime Minister and the Minister go too gung-ho and have to be reined in by more sober thinking from their Cabinet colleagues? It certainly looks like that.
Look, this is a difficult area, and I think, you know, having the wisdom of lots of different points of views is important, and I think we've come up with a good outcome here. And as you said, Kieran, the Parliamentary Committee into Intelligence Matters, which is made up of members of both sides of the Parliament, will now look at issues related to retrospectivity and other elements, and I think that's appropriate.
A lot of this is going to be, I guess, in some individual cases, largely not that relevant, given these individuals in all likelihood will be killed anyway, like Sharoof and Elamar. The government's pretty certain that Elamar is dead. Sharoof probably. No sympathy from anyone watching this for those individuals.
But that just underlines...
But it just shows that the debate really, I mean, because these people are going to get probably killed anyway.
Well, you can say there is a high likelihood that a number of people will be killed. Whether all of them are killed is a different matter, but just underlines the whole tragedy of the situation. I mean, these are combatants. These are people who are engaged in terrorist activities. What about all those civilians who are losing their lives? What about some of the innocent bystanders? What about some of the families, if we're talking about Sharoof and Elamar, young kids, you know, age 17 or 13 or 14-year-old bride to Elamar? I mean, it's just absolutely horrific, and it underlines what a tragedy for the Middle East. And
how do they live a normal life after that? And I guess the government's in a difficult position then in terms of those people coming back.
Sure. We've said in relation to Sharoof's family and Elamar's family, this is an issue for the families here in Australia to engage directly with the Australian Federal Police as the relevant authorities. We don't want to get into a public debate about who's coming back, if they're coming back, when they're coming back. We certainly, in the first instance, the Foreign Minister is absolutely right. We have to confirm that these two men are dead, and as you say, Elamar, our understanding is there's a high likelihood he is dead. It's yet to be confirmed in relation to Sharoof.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation for the family, for those kids. Any thoughts on that, Ed Husick, before we go to a break?
Well, it's awful all round in the sense that they were exposed to, that those children were exposed to what they had to see in the first place was awful. And then the issue of return is equally difficult, especially when everyone is saying, do not take up this cause, do not go here. The cause of Daesh is not a cause that is right at all. It's wrong. It's simply wrong. So why put yourself in that situation?
And parents are culpable. Parents are culpable if they take their children, young children, over to these.
And I don't understand as parents how they make that decision. I seriously don't. How
the kids brutalised. Do you really want, as a parent, that child? I mean,
exactly.
In blunt terms, if you've got a kid at school, do you want these kids to be in their school, given what they've seen?
Well, look,
it's a tough question.
The main thing is the well-being of the child, and that is the issue.
They've got to have to be named, surely. I mean, it's just been the father was a monster.
The difficulty is, Kieran, you can't make those calls. Like we can't, sitting here, make those calls about what will be done. But I agree with Josh. Ultimately, the welfare of the child is important, and getting people in who are experts in this to be able to make that call is really going to be critical.
This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company with me this morning. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer, Ed Husic, and Assistant Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Let's look at the Q&A program. I know it was a few days ago now, but it's got a lot of coverage today. Your thoughts on that? The ABC apologised. Is that enough?
And so they should have. It was very, very disappointing. It was a clear error of judgment. And I know the ABC's going through its own internal processes now, but you know, Zaki Mallah is somebody who's clearly very sympathetic with terrorism and what is happening over there in Syria and Iraq, and he shouldn't have been given a national platform in the way that he was.
I agree. It was a very bad lapse of judgment. They do need to fix it up quick, smart, because I do think Q&A is a good platform to sort of explore public issues.
But I saw Waleed Ali interview this bloke last night and nailed him. Isn't it better that you get that sort of goose on air and nail them like Waleed did last night?
Why even nail them? Why even get
there's a difference between Waleed Ali doing it in that way. But
who is he? I mean, this is a guy who has been convicted, who's obviously sympathetic. Why? To terrorism, to what is happening over there in Syria and Iraq, why give him a platform at all?
As I said,
why should Waleed Ali even interview him?
Because you show him up for what he is.
But he's not the leader of a group.
Sure, okay.
He's not got any case to make.
Okay.
I mean, why give him even any platform? That's my view.
Can I talk now?
Go for it.
I
either stop
Josh the Juggernaut mode. Okay, I'm finished now. You finished running. So I agree. Lapse of judgment, right? Does a good thing in terms of airing public issues. The thing that gets me, though, is Malcolm Turnbull picks and chooses how he gets involved. I mean, SBS takes the mickey out of people I care about in my area in terms of Struggle Street and that terrible promo that they did. And he says, oh, well, the board's there, they've got to be independent, can't get involved. Yet people are hurting on the ground as a result of what's going on. And he was right to make the call to call Q&A out on this, because they do need to make the change, but he's got to be consistent.
Let's look at a few other issues. The fuel tax compromise. The Labor should have supported this from the outset. This policy makes sense. It shouldn't have been revoked back in 2001 by John Howard. It was done for expedient purposes then. Of course, fuel excise should be indexed.
He's the armchair critic on AM Agenda, not you.
Well, there's my thought.
Your thoughts, I welcome yours on 13-13-32.
You should actually replay some of the statements of Bill Shorten about this issue when it first came
Bill Shorten makes a lot of good sense. You could learn a lot off Bill Shorten.
Admits his mistakes.
But the thing is, okay, so here's the situation. These guys say they won't increase taxes, but then their first budget actually increases taxes and reintroduces indexation. They then use a parliamentary mechanism to bring it into effect because they know the Senate won't vote it up. And as a result of that, we're at this point where we're going to have stacks of cash handed over to poor, struggling oil companies. I don't think so. So we have to make a call. We're going to see that happen, or are we going to actually use the money in a meaningful way? And what we suggested as an opposition is put it into roads. You've frozen the funding to local governments that's impact on their ability to do this. Give them the money, get the economic stimulus, get better roads. Makes good common sense.
Look, this was a desperate play into relevance by the Labor Party after they had been marginalised by our agreement with the Greens over pensions. I mean, consider what's happened in the last fortnight. We've just signed a FTA with our biggest trading partner, China, where 95% of all products exports from Australia into China will be tariff-free. We've got nearly $11 billion worth of savings through the Senate. Last night we passed our renewable energy target, and Bill Shorten is having to deal with a quartet of problems, including declining polls, the AWU, the National
I thought we're not
Conference,
commentators.
and of course coming last night's killing season.
Hang on, we don't talk about
the killing
polls.
season program. Ed, you weren't on there. What was? Were you cut from the program, or what was?
I was actually slated for the weather segment, and that didn't come through. So my agent's talking to them about that.
So you said no, basically.
Yeah, I did.
No. The real reason is his appearance fee was too high. Dasher was able to cut a deal there, Dastiari, because he wanted the exposure, but Ed, put too high a price. But he was mentioned.
Well, he got product
he was mentioned on the killing season by default last night because they talked about the Sussex Street, hit squad, the right wing of the Labor Party in Sydney, which Kevin Rudd called, the casino of
Casino land, wasn't it?
Casino land of Labor politics, the moral heart. The moral epicentre of the Labor Party, he called.
Yeah, that'd be right. Liberal Party member has trouble saying the word moral.
It flows out very nicely.
You must be happy the show's done.
Yeah,
finished.
this is the last time we're going to be on the show
Did you get on
until
Ivy?
together.
You gonna watch it again?
Huh?
You going to watch it again? Reruns?
Sky, Angelo just heard you say that we're going on to iView.
No.
Your card.
Yeah, well, it's been nice knowing you.
Exactly. And for his last appearance on AM Agenda, Josh Frydenberg, what are your comments?
Well, I'll be watching Killing Season again.
Of
I'll learn
course
what
you
not
will.
to do.
Oh, yeah, really.
All right,
So
fellas.
what happened in February?
We're out of time. Nice tie, Ed. I just should say that on passing.
Not to disco?
It's not red, not blue, but
Not
somewhere in
to disco?
between.
No, lilac. I like
Oh.
it.
Fashion consultant to the stars.
We're out of time. We've got to go.
Actually, I'm not a
Thanks,
star. You're a star.
Big break. Back in just a
That's
moment.
it.